Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So this week's Parsha is Hukkat. It actually is a section of Torah that is read more often than just this week in our weekly cycle. It is read actually in the period leading up to Pesach, because the first chapter of Hukkat has the section that deals with the red heifer, right? The cow that was used as part of the temple ritual to help purify from coming in contact with a dead body. And as we got ready for Passover, that was part of the ritual. It was part of the process that was needed in order to do that. That is not what I'm going to talk about today. The second part of our Parsha is what I want to talk about today, and it's chapter 20 of Numbers. You can find it beginning on page 883. I want to think for a moment, actually, before we even get into our Torah portion. I want to go back to Passover, since we started talking about Passover. There's lots of symbols that are on the Passover table. But a relatively new symbol, new meaning from the 20th century, came onto our Passover tables, and it is called Kos Miriam, the cup of Miriam. Now, we know about the 4 cups of wine that we're supposed to drink. We know about Elijah's cup that's supposed to be filled with wine. The question is, what is Miriam's cup supposed to be filled with? Water. Why is Miriam's cup filled with water? I'm going to hold on one second. Let's. I know you know. I'll let you answer in a sec. Anybody else? Why do we think Miriam's cup is filled with water? What is the connection between Miriam and water? The Babylonian Talmud in Tanit reads as follows: 3 good sustainers rose up for the Jewish people during the exodus of Egypt. They are Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And 3 good gifts were given from heaven through their agency. And these are the cloud, the manna, and the well of water. The well was given to the Jewish people in the merit of Miriam, the pillar of cloud in the merit of Aaron, and the manna in the merit of Moses. So we clearly have a connection here between Miriam and water. We still don't know exactly why. When we look at this week's Parsha, we will. Turn to page 883. The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Sin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs, vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink." So we're about actually to get to the section of Torah that very often we talk about, where Moses is told that he should speak to the rock and water will come out, and instead Moses hits the rock, and actually this is the sin of Moses that is most often associated with why he doesn't get to go into the land of Israel. But what we skip over is the Miriam part, right? And it says here almost as an afterthought, and Miriam died and was buried there. And the very next verse says, and the community was without water. Now the rabbis take juxtaposition in Torah to mean something. And they asked, why are these two verses connected one to the other? The death of Miriam and the fact that there was no water. And the rabbis created this midrash that said actually that because of Miriam, there was a well of water that traveled wherever she was. There was water. She was that source, that connection to that source of purity, that source of water, to that source of life. And when she died, that water, that well, disappeared. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? I want to dig into this imagery of the well for us today. What does it mean? What's the significance of it? And why should we still, this is why we put Kos Miriam, a cup of water, at our Passover table, to remember not only all the plagues and all the things that Moses did and all the things that that Aaron did, but also what Miriam did, providing the water. Claire. So Claire is arguing that it goes down to basic survival, right? You can't live without water. You can actually live without food a lot longer than you can live without water. And so it was basic survival, okay? Yeah.
I think up until then, everything had been provided for them. So they didn't really have to even think about the water. It was just kind of there. And now, as they're in, was it the 38th year, they're getting closer to the finish line here. And it's like, oh man, like now we're going to have to try to find our own water. And they're going to have to arguably fight for water rights. And I'm almost thinking of, was it Isaac and the wells that he dug? Like we see these themes of wells throughout.
For a desert people, wells are pretty important, right? Water is pretty important.
The other thing I was going to say is at the Pesach table, I'm trying to remember the liturgy, but it's Zot Kos Miriam, Mayim Chaim. And it's about not just water, but it's the living water.
Good. So we have, thank you, perfect segue. Diana used a phrase that is super important to us in our tradition, Mayim Chaim, living water, right? Mayim Chaim. Now, we use that phrase in a lot of different places, even today, right? For anybody who's familiar with the concept of a mikveh, right? A mikveh where one can go through a process of becoming pure again, ritually pure, or even taking kalim, our vessels, but like the pots, pans, dishes, those sorts of things, and making them usable. You can go into a mikveh. Now, a mikveh has to be mayim chaim, living water, flowing water. It can't be drawn. It can't be collected, right, in that sort of way. It has to flow through, be natural, right? For those who have experienced, and there are a number of people here who have been part of our Chevra Kadisha. Chevra Kadisha is a group that prepares bodies for burial. There is a process by which the body is washed and prepared for burial, not a physical cleansing, that happens too, but a ritual and a spiritual cleansing, and that water is poured over the body in an unceasing flow. And it's called Mayim Chaim, it's called living water. There's something about water that's more than just physical life, but there's a spiritual aspect to water as well, which is extraordinarily powerful. Water is refreshing. Water is pure. It's clear. It has all these amazing symbolism around it. It's unsurprising that it becomes an important part, going back especially for a desert people. For a desert people. Anything else, Marge?
And a totally different thought, which is, if Miriam knew that water was the crystal clear, didn't she have some responsibility to talk to Moses about talking to God to make sure Moses?
It's a good question, right? Didn't Miriam have some responsibility, knowing that this well was sort of connected to her, to make sure that it went on afterwards? Maybe she did. We don't know. All it says is, and Miriam died and was buried. We don't know what the conversation was. We don't know anything about it. We know that it was a crisis at that moment.
So isn't it maybe a message to us to be careful that we take care after?
Yeah, it certainly can be a message that we need to make sure that the gifts that we have and are giving to the community are sustained even after we're not here, for sure. Now, there was another option. Now, right? The other option was, as the people complained, they came to Moses. Moses went to God, and God said, okay, this is what you need to do. Moses didn't quite follow the instructions. Different story, different sermon, right? But that was there, right? There was a pathway. Obviously, it wasn't that the children of Israel died of thirst in the desert. Okay, anybody else? So, Carol Ox, who is a modern commentator, she actually wrote a book called The Torah, a Woman's Commentary. I highly recommend it. She writes as follows: how can we best understand what Miriam's well represented? Israel in the Bible had two main centers of practice: the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, which was then later replaced by the temple, and the home. Moses, we might say, had focused on institutional religion, right? Moses was all about the Mishkan, that central ritual. Our midrashic rendering of the story, Miriam was there. Her gift was to raise the personal practices of the Israelite. Miriam was all about personal connection, right? And the women dancing with the timbrels, right? Miriam was the one who saw that there were people that weren't actually engaged in what was going on, and she engaged them. She went out, she grabbed the timbrel, she grabbed the other women, and they danced together. She was an incredibly powerful figure, not as part of the sort of set ritual that became Jewish tradition with Moses and with Aaron, but she was the person who was always behind the scenes, making sure that everything was ready to go. And I think that is such a powerful symbol when we connect it to water. Because when we sit down at a meal, what do we remember? We remember, wow, that was a great meal. It was a great dish, right? It was a great appetizer. It was a great, whatever it was. We hardly ever remember that was really a great glass of water. And yet, at every single meal, although sometimes in California during droughts they don't give it to us automatically anymore, you have to ask for it, right? At every meal, there's a glass of water there, right? It's part of it's what we need. It's what we need. And it's that quiet, almost forgotten aspect of who we are and what we need that Miriam represents in such an amazing way. In such an amazing way. So as we look at this week's Parsha and the death of Miriam, we're losing something that while the Torah in its patriarchy, right, it's like, okay, Miriam died. A little bit different when Aaron died, a little different when Moses died. The three were all siblings. The connection of who Miriam was and what Miriam did back to water is extremely powerful. And there's one more piece that I'll have you think about. Her story started where? Where did Miriam's story in the Bible start? At the Nile. Right? Miriam was the one who ultimately followed Moses down the Nile to make sure that Moses was going to be okay. Miriam was that protector in the background, ensuring that everything was going to turn out the way that it needed to. That was who she was from the beginning. That is who she was all the way through. And when she died, we lost that. We lost that. And the people felt it. The people felt it. And it took a while for us to be able to figure out how to navigate without that in the background. Any comments or questions before we move on with our reading? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Miriam wasn't perfect. Correct. So yeah, Miriam wasn't perfect. We read a few weeks ago about Miriam's. It was probably leprosy of some sort, right? Miriam was struck with leprosy because she was jealous and she spoke negatively. And human beings are human beings. Moses wasn't perfect. Aaron wasn't perfect. Miriam wasn't perfect. It's one of the things that we can that I love about our tradition. Is that we read about all these people that are supposed to be models for our life, and we're reading about a whole bunch of people who are not perfect. God is the only one that is perfect. And even, by the way, even sometimes we question some of God's motives, right? Human beings aren't perfect. Miriam wasn't perfect. And yet she was still so incredibly powerful in what she represented. And I want us to remember today that as we think about this story of Exodus, right? It's not just about the people who are in those positions of power that make a difference. Moses and Aaron had the positions of power, but Miriam had a voice, and a powerful voice. We need to think about that as well as we face the world today. Shabbat shalom, everyone.